Thank you. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much thank you for coming out. It means a lot to me. I feel like I'm into your sort of personal family time, and you all have added on a bit of time to come in and spend some time. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Nick, for sponsoring the event. I'm going to take you through a presentation fairly quickly to try to leave some time for some Q&A. And I'm not used to holding a microphone. I talk with my hands. And I move so that I can manage my anxiety when I'm doing a presentation like this. So I'll make sure that I keep my microphone close to my face as I'm going through this. And so let me just launch right into it. I have been in New Zealand for 14 years. I love New Zealand. I didn't anticipate that I would stay longer than 3 years when I came over in 2003 to work with Fonterra. I found Fonterra to be a compelling proposition I was sitting in Manhattan in March of 2003. I was working with Prudential Financial on Wall Street, and I got a call from an Australian headhunter on behalf of a brand new co-op called Fonterra in New Zealand. And I just found the whole notion, the story behind it, the opportunity to be a part of something huge. I had never worked for a company before that would have such intricate impact on the economic viability of a nation. I mean, when we talk about line of sight, we use that term to talk about the person coming through the door each day to come to work trying to make a difference and believing that the work that they're doing is having impact beyond just sort of the gain from a paycheck, that you're contributing to something big and important. And I didn't know really anything about New Zealand. I didn't know anything about the dairy sector, et cetera, but I wanted to be a part of something special and something big, and that was what brought me to New Zealand. New Zealand is what kept me in New Zealand, and that is I feel like I've gotten younger and healthier since moving to New Zealand. I know that that's impossible, but it honestly feels to be the case. I live in Auckland, and I became a New Zealand citizen in 2008. So full-fledged, bona fide, got the Queen stamp in my passport. I'm for real in New Zealand. The topic of authentic leadership is one that is near and dear to my heart from a personal vantage. So I wrote a book in 2013 called The Imposter Syndrome. And I wanted to normalize a syndrome that a lot of people think is something that's rare when you're going through it. Roughly 75% of you sitting in this room will experience imposter syndrome at some point in your career. It's the pressure that we put on ourselves and the vulnerability that we feel when we go into stretch, when someone says to you, look, I think this role is a bigger role, it's a broader role, it'll create wonderful opportunities for you. Sometimes people will see things in us before we see them in ourselves. And so there we go, up a learning curve. And sometimes when we get on a learning curve, it means that we have to step away from certainty. We have to step away from what we consider to be those things that define our success. So we can't be perfect on a learning curve. We have to get comfortable with the idea that learning is a part of the human condition, and that you don't necessarily have to be this perfect person as you're stretching yourself. And it's something that I emphasize with the executives that I work with executive teams, to make it okay for people to normalize vulnerability a bit more. I've been behind that mask a couple of times in my life, and so I know what it's like to believe that somebody's about to walk up and reach for that mask and rip it off your face and go, you don't belong here. How did you get into that role? I remember when coming to Fonterra, I dropped in my very first day at the executive table, and here were these dairy giants from the core companies that formed Fonterra in the amalgamation. And I'm sitting around the table with all of these experts in dairy. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness gracious, I don't belong here. What am I going to do at this table? What am I going to bring? We all started laughing probably a week later when we realized the dairy giants, me, and everybody else sitting at the table was that we're doing something new here. Regardless of our expertise and our experiences, we're all sitting at a table about to lead this new entity, and we all decided that it would be better if we just needed each other, rather than everybody sitting there trying to be this perfect person. When you feel the pressure to be a perfect person, it's hard to need other people. And it has an impact on your ability to connect. And that's really what, when people talk about authenticity, they're talking about they're talking about a connection with another individual. And it's hard to connect when people perceive that there's nothing for you to learn. You don't need people for anything. And so I wanted to normalize imposter syndrome and have people get into some conversations about that. And then in 2015, I wrote the book Fitting and Standing Out to really take a look at the inherent tension between those two extremes on a continuum. That's life, fitting in, standing out. Anytime you go into a new organization, a new company, a new civic group, a new church, anything where there are 3 or more people and you're going in, and the idea is that you want to fit and that you want to belong, the need to affiliate, the need to make a difference. And sometimes people go to an extreme, fitting in so well that they become irrelevant. Sometimes people fit in and put themselves on mute. And in some organizations, quiet equates to effective. And I get real concerned when teams are quiet. When you've got a quiet team, or when you've got a quiet organization, it may suggest that people are fitting in way too well to the point where there is no one disturbing the peace in that regard there. On the other end of that continuum, standing out. Sometimes people stand out in such a way that they lose others. And so at either end of those continuums, whether or not you're on mute, on silent over here, or screaming your head over here, if you cannot connect with people and take them with you, you become irrelevant in terms of leadership. And I think that it's our role as leaders in organizations to minimize the number of people who live at those extremes. My interest in authenticity comes from a very personal place. I was born in 1955. I'm 61 now, and when I grew up, I just didn't consider it to be safe to be openly gay. I mean, I knew as a kid, certainly 11, 12, 13, you begin to sort of figure out, okay, this is who I am, but who I am seems to disturb the peace. And I tried hard when I was coming of age as a young teenager to get my head around the idea that there was something about me that disturbed the peace, that there was something about being gay that caused such ire and consternation and angst. It would generate meanness and things that I just couldn't put my head around as a kid. Kids are very intuitive, and you sort of figure out, in this sense of what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I deduced early on that it was much easier for me not to be gay. I didn't quite know how to do that, but I figured that, I would try real hard not to be this thing that I was, and I wasn't sure how to turn it off, but I certainly realized that when I put the symbols around me of being straight, the anxiety level seemed to go down in all the people that mattered. And so by the time I became 19, 20, went to university, I just associated, whenever I showed up with a girl, the whole room would go, you can pick up on things like that. It's like, oh, okay, no more angst. No more angst. And then I just decided, like a lot of gay people in my generation, that I would get married and live a life as a straight man. It just caused less consternation. When I was in elementary school, as a kid, we used to have a subject on our report card, and it was called citizenship, in addition to math and science and all of those things. And I prided myself on getting an A in citizenship. Citizenship was about how you behaved. And the kids who were quiet, including me, were the kids who got A's in citizenship. That was my goal, was to please the teacher. Don't get out of line, stay, just whatever the teacher wanted, it's yes ma'am, absolutely, be quiet, stand in line, fall in line. I had a good friend named Wendell Fitzgerald. I often talk about Wendell, and I say I'm going to look him up at some point. Wendell was an inquisitive kid. I didn't know what inquisitive meant when I was 7, but Wendell he just liked to ask questions. He learned through inquiry. He was a divergent thinker. Again, as a 7-year-old, you're not thinking about that, but Wendell he asked a lot of questions. He wasn't a bad kid. He just disturbed the peace a little bit. He would always have his hand up.
And you just hit fast forward on the way.
Did I hit? Did I? Oh my goodness gracious! Thank you, thank you, thank you. I said I wanted to get through fairly quickly, but I didn't realize that I was. Goodness gracious! Thank you, thank you. Wonder what you all were looking at up there. Wendell got Fs in citizenship, always being sent to the principal's office, always standing in the corner. And it was just, I didn't quite fully appreciate that I would carry those mental models into life, the mental model that being quiet and not disturbing the peace equates to being a good citizen, getting an A in citizenship. So that was really how for a big part of my life, I just sort of figured my role. If there was something about me that was causing you to be uncomfortable, I felt it was my duty to reach for my own volume button and turn down whatever it was, turn the volume down on whatever it was that was causing you angst. That was my mental model in terms of my role as a good citizen. And I think many of us carry those mental models into organizations. That many of us do go into organizations with the idea that we need to get in here quickly and we need to get in here quietly. And that quiet is more effective than disturbing the peace. Even if you were hired to disturb the peace, very often the norms in the organization sort of reinforce you getting in here and quieting down. So that's how I figured I would live my life, as a quiet, straight man with a family. I married a lovely woman, Kimberly, and we have 2 daughters, Leslie, who's 35, and Alexis, who's 33. They both live in California. I have 2 grandsons. I wouldn't change a thing. When I looked at my oldest grandson is 5, and he's just graduating from kindergarten. He's about to go to primary school, and he had his cap and gown on from preschool, and just when I look at that photo, I wouldn't change a thing about my life, not at all. I'm just telling you the story to give you a sense of how far it is that people will go to not disturb the peace in that respect. So I got married. I finished my PhD in clinical psychology. Kim and I and the girls moved to Indiana. I was working as a staff psychologist in a mental health system in Indiana, and I wanted to be a manager. After 2 or 3 years, I wanted to be a manager. I was seeing like 20 patients a day. Like most of the staff psychologists, we were burning ourselves out, and there were these folks called managers who lived on the other side of the building, and they had nice offices, and they were seeing fewer patients, and they were supervising people like us. And I thought, I want to be one of them. And all the roads seemed to lead to the US military. Just in the sense of you got your PhD, there's a critical shortage of medical service officers at that time. In 1986, at that time, a critical shortage of medical service officers across all 3 branches in the US military. So I thought, okay, I knew that it was illegal to be gay in the US military in 1986, but that didn't matter because I wasn't gay. So I figured I just never, had entered an organization that said it was illegal to be gay. I didn't quite fully appreciate the significance of that until I was completing the application. Question 3, the Department of Defense application in 1986. Question 13, have you ever initiated or voluntarily engaged in any homosexual activity? Question 13 on the application. I'm like, wow. I denied being gay all my life. That was easy to do, but I had never looked at it on a piece of paper before. I'd never had the question posed on a piece of paper before where I had to actually tick the box and officially deny who I was. It was quite confronting. It said, if yes, please provide details. And That just wasn't going to go down. Wasn't going to go down at all. And I figured, what the heck? I'll hold my nose and just go through this process. Again, I just wanted the stamp on my CV that I was a manager and I went in to run a mental health clinic. I loved everything about being an officer. I didn't anticipate how much I would love being an officer. I took it very seriously. Unlike a lot of the pilots and what they would consider themselves to be the regular officers would often look at the medical service officers as like on MASH, you know, like Hawkeye and Pierce, sort of the medical officers over there, not real officers. Well, when I put something on, I take it quite seriously, and I was determined to show that you can't stereotype medical service officers. And I took it my mission to be an exemplary officer. I went to squadron officer school. I started to really train myself and learn as much as I could about the U.S. Air Force, the military, our base, our wing, everything. And I did something in 1988 that no medical service officer had done before at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. And I won Company Grade Officer of the Year. And you know, I really cherished that because it was a reflection of how hard I had truly been working and how seriously I took my role. Be careful when you start lying about who you are. It never, ever leads to a good place. It'll take you right into the eye of an existential storm. So wouldn't you know it, the chief psychologist of the U.S. Air Force called me up and said to me, Captain Hillman, because of your exemplary service and that award that you just won, I'd like to invite you to come to the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs and take on the role of assistant professor in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership, where you'll be teaching 4,000 cadets. It'll be a 4-year tour. You'll likely put on major. And I talked to Kim about it, and we thought, you know, heck, 4 more years, I was loving this thing. I was loving the construct of leadership, and off we went. I love the academy. I love teaching leadership now formally. I didn't know anything about leadership prior to, you know, going into the U.S. Air Force. What I really didn't anticipate, but now can fully appreciate, that while I was in the U.S. Air Force for 7 years, I never heard the word manager. Always leader. I really, really got under that construct of leadership. And in 1992, I won Outstanding Military Educator of the Year at the Air Force Academy. And I tell you that to say that it's while I had that mask on, you know, when you're an imposter, you can do some good things. You can do some good things with that mask on. The question is, what are you really sort of setting yourself up for? In 1992, in the US presidential election, Bill Clinton and all of the other Democratic Party nominees vowed that if they were elected in 1992, they'd lift the ban on gay people being able to serve openly in the military. That ban had been in place since, well, forever, essentially, formalized after World War II. In a different way. It used to be a criminal offense during World War II. Afterwards, no longer a criminal offense, but people would be discharged. In 1974, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality as a psychiatric disorder. So the military really didn't have any other, the only thing they had to keep gay people from serving openly was this myth that somehow gay people would ruin the esprit and the morale of straight troops. And that was a myth that had persisted then for a better part of 2 decades. And a lot of Americans were just going, this is crazy, this is foolish. The compulsory draft had ended. You know, the numbers of people voluntarily going into the military were starting to dwindle. The math wasn't adding up. So a lot of Americans said, hey, what's up with this policy? So I got called into the superintendent's office in January of 1993, General Hosmer, who said to me, Captain Hillman, congratulations. Because of your exemplary service, you've been selected as one of 7 U.S. Air Force officers to go to Washington, D.C., where you'll be sequestered for 3 months to serve on a commission to determine if gay people can serve openly in the U.S. military. Be careful when you start lying. It'll take you right up close to, right into the eye of an existential storm. And so there I was, folks. Had lied my way right into a showdown with my own integrity. And off I go to Washington, D.C. in January of '93, honored because I had been selected for this, this panel, but terrified. You talk about that mask on. I mean, I walked in, I remember the first day we were sequestered in Georgetown. We were all in civilian clothes. This was all very secretive in terms of, what was happening with this commission. And I thought that there was going to be some kind of gaydar screener thing, as you walked in the door where it would go beep, 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 beep. But I managed to keep my cool like an imposter. I was very, when you're an imposter, you don't breathe a whole lot. You want to sort of shrink yourself as much as possible, and that was sort of my strategy, stay invisible. I didn't have I was a flunky in that scenario there. The panel was, the head panel were 3 generals and an admiral. And they made it clear to us on day 2 of these 3 months. Gentlemen, it was 3 women and 44 men and 3 women. So they basically said, just to be clear, folks, that ban is not being lifted, not on our watch. Not on our watch. This gay sympathizer president that just got elected, and they hated his wife. Absolutely. This is 1992. It's just funny how history would play itself out. So there we knew on day 2 that we were about to participate in a sham of a process. I had to really take that in. So I'm sitting there, recognized for my exemplary service, and yet already realizing that I'm participating in a process that's not going to advance the dial at all for people who might be a bit more courageous than me. And we had pro-gay groups and anti-gay groups come in for 3 months to petition. It was a consultative process. And so the pro-gay groups brought their best research to sort of make the case that gay people would be able to serve, and the anti-gay groups brought their case as well. And I just sat there and listened to this testimony. And it was hard. I mean, the anti-gay groups came in with all kinds of research on people like me, and how people like me would not be able to serve in the military because we were ethically compromised. They came in with genetic studies. They came in with all kinds of, from every angle, ethically, morally compromised, hell-bound. We got it from every, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm thinking, wow, like a good imposter, the goal is to be quiet. And it really became clear to me, I wasn't going to be a fool. I wasn't going to do anything that was, I had a family. There were moments when I thought, here's my 15 minutes of fame. A pro-gay group came in and addressed the panel and said, look, to the admiral and the 3 generals, gentlemen, would like to present research that suggests that 13 to 18% of the US military is already gay. So what's the big deal? It's already, and after they left, the admiral he just went ballistic. He was done, tired of these stats and who are these, and he just banged the table ferociously. He did, and he just said, I've been in the military for 35 years. And I have never, these stats are inflated, and I have never, ever met anyone gay. And there I was, sitting as close as you are there. And I just, that fleeting fantasy that you have, I just wanted to stick my hand out and go, well, girlfriend, this is your lucky day. But it wasn't going to go down. Like all imposters, I sat on my hands. There was no way I was going to do that. But we knew that the best it was going to, don't ask, don't tell was born from, don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue was the policy that was born from that commission. And we knew in March that that was going to be the case, but it took until December to get the sort of the PR around it sorted because it was a disappointment to President Clinton. What it meant was that they would call off the witch hunts and it would no longer be illegal to be gay in the military as long as you weren't gay. So the idea was, it didn't advance the dial much of anything. When you all come to work each day, you put your family's pictures up, you put your partner's picture up, you come in, you talk about your weekend, you talk about the trips, the holidays that you've taken. The idea was if you're gay in the military, you are unidimensional because you can't really talk about your broader life, because if you do, you're out. So I don't feel like I advanced the dial at all in that respect. When we went back to our bases, we were all awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for distinguished service to the U.S. In the military, you don't have bonuses and things like that. You stand your officers and your enlisted troops up in front of an audience of their peers, and you pin a medal on their uniform, and that goes a long way. And there were 1,000 people there in the audience to see me get this medal. And the first time in my life that a scripture from the New Testament really resonated with me deeply and personally. I grew up in church. That was, as an African American, particularly in my generation, you grew up in church. Church was where you grew up on Sundays, and scripture was very pronounced in my life. But I tell you, standing there on that stage, in the scripture from the book of Mark, for what shall it profit you to gain the whole world and yet lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your soul? And I thought, standing there on the stage that day in 1993, that there wasn't anything worth more than my soul. That I had gone to such an extent to be deemed acceptable and to be accepted, that I had turned down the essence of who I was as a person in order to be accepted, in order to get an A in citizenship. And that's when I had a real reckoning with myself, standing on that stage, that they were pinning a medal on the uniform of a man with no soul, no integrity. 2 days later, I had the toughest conversation that I'll ever have with anyone, ever. My wife. To talk to her. 2 days after that, I went in to talk to my commander and talk to him as well. I no longer could stay in a situation that was stripping me of the essence of who I was. My wife is a beautiful person. We're still very good friends, and we have 2 grandkids. We see each other regularly. I didn't anticipate, I thought that coming out was going to be something that would put me, just isolate me, just no one would understand. And what I realized was once I started being compassionate to myself, once I accepted myself, the energy shift, the validation that I received. My daughters, when they were in their early 20s, my daughters were 11 and 9 then. I didn't want to put all of that on an 11 and 9-year-old. So when they were later, that we would sit down and have this big conversation. But my daughters came to me when it flew over to New York. I was living in New York. And they sat down with me and said, "We just want to tell you that we are so proud of you. I don't care about any medals. I don't care about any awards. I don't care about anything. But to have my 2 daughters tell me how proud they were of me, and that they could feel that the essence of the connection with them was much richer. They love having a father who's a whole person." It's something that I thought, hey, when I was a kid growing up, you never talked about your gay relatives. You alluded to them. Your uncle who was the perpetual bachelor, or your aunt who was living with her best friend and had been living with her best friend for 35 years, but we can never say the words out loud. So it meant a lot to me that my daughters brag about their father, their gay father, which is a huge thing. So I can talk to you about what it feels like and the psychological distress and how unsustainable it is to have people persist in a situation where they feel they have to compromise on who they are. There's a cost inside the tent, the proverbial tent, whether it be the military or your company or your church or your civic organization or whatever it is. When we put our hand up and voluntarily say, "I'd like to join you," implicitly buying into the norms that define the social order in that organization. And very often we don't fully appreciate what it is we're walking into until we get in there. I didn't realize that was Harry Potter. I'd been using this slide for a long time, and then someone said to me a few months ago, Harold, you know that's Harry Potter, don't you? And I was like, well, I was just choosing I wanted to indicate someone who's been put in timeout and sent outside the tent. And when you get hired, sometimes when you are hiring someone and you say, I want you to come in and to this company and disturb the peace. I'm hiring you because you think differently. I'm hiring you because you ask the questions that should be asked. I'm hiring you because you're different. I want you to get in here quickly, and I want you to be noisy. I want you to really shake things up. And the person walks in with that mandate, and you know the story because you all have been told the same thing, and you often tell people the same thing. Get in here and shake things up, and when you walk in, people start reaching, particularly if you start poking and prodding, you'll get put in timeout. You'll get put in timeout. People get a little frosty, they get a little unreceptive. We forget that people are psychologically wed in there. Every now and then, the person next to him comes out and goes, hey, this is me talking to Wendell back in primary school. Hey, Wendell, why don't you just be quiet? Why don't you just stop asking so many questions? Why don't you just sit down? Sit down, dude, and stop being so noisy. That was the role we used to play with Wendell. And Wendell would just come back in and disturb the peace a little bit more. It's daunting in that social order there. The social order that you can sometimes tell how stringent a social order is. And a social order is required. When you put 3, 4, 5 people in a room, leave them there for 3 or 4 days, you go back in, there's a social order established. It's just how humans are. We're going to put some semblance of norms begin to form. You can tell an organization that's got a stringent social order if there's no required uniform, but everybody dresses the same. It's associated with the brand. We require people to be a certain way, act a certain way, conduct themselves, our values, and those types of things. But what we lose sight of is that people are constantly scanning and adjusting and adapting around what they perceive to be the norm in there. We make it easier. I make the case in the book, Fitting and Standing Out, that the gravitational pull is in the direction of fitting in. A much stronger gravitational pull. Get in here quickly, and get in here quietly. We have induction to help you in. We'll pair you up with another person. We need you in here and up the learning curve and in that seat, preferably quiet as quickly as possible. I tell you what, I've heard so many stories from so many clients. I do a lot of executive coaching, people who are trying to fit in. One woman who was told, hey, you're too perky. You just need to turn that, and she sat at her desk for the better part of a couple of weeks, really quiet, trying to understand what it was. She was working in an office full of introverts, and her boss just told her, look, you're too perky. We just don't like that around here. You need to turn the volume down on that. And so she tried her best to. She sat at her desk. How do you turn joy down? How do you turn joy down? How do you mute joy in a person who is extroverted, a person who is just an optimist, a person who infuses an electric energy into an organization? Another client of mine, a friend of mine at Fonterra, this didn't happen at Fonterra, this was earlier in his career, and he was told by his boss, he was in sales, global sales, and he was told by his boss, don't laugh at meetings. I need you not to laugh because you have an ignorant laugh. He sort of snorted when he laughed, and it was quite infectious. Do you have a friend who snorts when they laugh? Do you have a friend with an infectious laugh? You know your laugh is attached to your limbic system. There ain't a whole lot you can do about it when you try to laugh intelligently. This is what so don't laugh. And he thought, and he, as he's telling me the story, he's thinking, I'm a grown man, I'm mature, I'm assertive. And yet when my boss told me this, he says he tried for the better part of a year to not laugh. That we begin to adjust our volume accordingly, and before you know it, you end up over here at the point where sometimes what the team needs is for you to be quiet and to just get in line. another friend of mine, he's in his 60s now, but when he was 19, he worked for a food processing plant, and he chipped a piece of his finger off in a slicer one morning, and bleeding profusely, and his boss rushed him to the A&E in his car, and then dropped him off at the A&E and said to him, "It didn't happen at work." It didn't happen at work. And there he stood at 19, his boss pulling away, and he went in to get his finger treated and thought, holy moly, the team needs for me to be quiet. And he said he struggled with that for a long time. He's a strong advocate for health and safety now because he went to the step. When you get to this point, this calibrate point, this is 2:30 in the morning when you are laying in bed and you can't get to sleep because you're wondering why you didn't ask that question at the meeting. You're wondering why you're sitting on a perspective that you know you were hired to bring to the table, but now you've started to mute yourself and you started to dress it down and water it down to the point where your conscience won't. The beautiful thing about the human conscience is that if you get stuck right here around a matter of principle, it's not going to let you sleep. The conscience is going to wake you up each and every night to ask you the question, why are you so quiet? Why are you so quiet? Every now and then we got to adjust the volume a little bit. We maybe need to go into a different channel, frequency. Maybe you're in channel 3 and you want to go to channel 4 because they hear things a little bit differently. They need a little bit more data in this organization. But if you're asking me to go from channel 3 to channel 12, that's a lot. And that's not sustainable. Standing out is harder. It is harder. We have an obligation as leaders, to make it possible for people to have a perspective, a point of view. A young man who recently confronted a team of 7. The first woman had come to join the team. And this guy is 22 years old, and he's got 3 guys on the team who are in their 40s, who he considered to be mentors, coaches of him. He's the youngest person on the team. A new person joins, she's the first woman, and these guys just go to town in the most unprofessional way. Every time she walks out the room, they tear into her in such an unprofessional way. Just the language, just all of the stuff. And this young guy sat through that for a few weeks, laughing. You ever laugh at something that's not funny? You ever stay quiet around something that really offends you in terms of your principles because you want to be deemed acceptable? He had had enough. And one day when she walked out and they tore into her, this young guy stood up and said, "I'm not going to take it anymore. Guys, I get sick when you all talk about her that way. And I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not going to stay here. I'm not going to be part of this." And he walked out of the room and walked back over to his open space area. And he was trembling. He's telling me the story and trembling as he's telling me this. And he said that's when he learned what leadership was about. Within an hour, 2 of those 3 mentors of his came to him independently and said, "Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for reminding us. Thanks for reminding us who we need to be as a team." And that's when he realized that leadership has nothing to do with rank. It has everything to do with whether or not you're bringing your perspective to the table. And if you want a quiet team, you're not being a catalyst in terms of leadership. So we need to make it easier for our people to stand out in organizations. Where you fit on that continuum between fitting and standing out has a lot to do with how you answer this question here. So when I'm working with any executive, I work with a lot of chief executives, a lot of senior executives, a lot of executive teams. That's primarily my work. And this is a starting point. It's an important question. How perfect do you need to be in an imperfect world? The cycles of change have increased 3-fold over the last 20 years in organizations, whereas it used to be that change was a discrete project that you could wrap up discreetly, put a bow on, and then get back to your day job. In 2017, your day job is leading change. We used to take people through change via process, not leadership, managing them through via process. And I'm making the case more and more in 2017 that you can't lead people through change in 2017 behind a process where we hide behind a process and come out periodically to have a conversation and then get back behind the shield and move to the next date and come out and have a conversation. With the anxiety and the vulnerability swirling in organizations, authenticity is imperative more than ever in this world. Brené Brown is a clinical social worker in the US, and she gave a TED talk called The Power of Vulnerability, which has been seen by millions and millions of people. It is powerful, and I recommend that you take a look at it. And she describes those who, if you don't need to be perfect in an imperfect world, and if you have a reasonable handle on vulnerability, and that is, I'm okay with actually letting other people help, needing other people, then that's considered to be wholehearted, where you are not inclined to hide. Some people who struggle with vulnerability in order to remain perfect oftentimes will go to an extreme, so that when things start to get a bit unsettled, the strategy is to just go into a shell and hide. And at the other end of the continuum, sometimes the strategy is to lock down. So in organizations where vulnerability is not accepted, and you have to be perfect, it's easy to be perfect if you're invisible. That way you don't have to take a stand. And it's easy to be perfect if you swell up like a blowfish and hold your own. But there's no give and take. And that's really what's associated with being wholehearted and what I consider to be wholehearted leadership. So when I'm working with teams, dysfunctional teams, the majority of members tend to go to the extreme as opposed to living in that wholehearted zone. I talk about 4 essentials in the book, Fitting and Standing Out, that are required for to be a wholehearted leader. And one of those is trust. And that is just your comfort with imperfection. It is hard to have a conversation with a perfect boss. Have you ever tried that? Anybody got a perfect boss? It's hard. It is hard. Empathy is hard. You begin to hide things, you begin to, dilute things, you begin to dress things up because this person can't relate to what it means to make a mistake. And this person feels like they're always sitting in judgment. So if you don't want to be judged very often, you just hide things, you just make things, because my boss cannot be empathetic. It helps around human connection in the first instance to be able to be okay with the fact that there are going to be mistakes. It makes it a lot easier for people to come in and talk with you. I make the case, Dr. Maslow made the case back in the 1940s, that there's a human need to be needed. We all want to be needed. We want to go to work. We go to work wanting to be needed, wanting to be validated for making a difference. That's all a big part of engagement. It's interesting because if you feel the need to be perfect, then you don't need anyone. And if people come to work needing to be needed and you don't need them, there's a broken thing going down there. There are some bosses who do not need their team. The energy that they project is optional. I hired you because of the way you think, but then when you come into my office to help me think, I go, no, tried that, done that, been there. Bye. Turn the volume down on you while you're leaving out the door. That type of a thing. Do you let other people help? When there's a friction, when I'm dealing with on dysfunctional teams with 2 people who aren't clicking well, there's no connection there, it's usually because they've stopped needing each other. They don't need each other. They don't wander into each other's office and go, I'm really struggling with this. You ever been in this situation before? You got anything it's a different connection. Affirmation. If I need to be perfect, then I don't need to thank you for anything, because if I'm perfect, you haven't done anything to help me. And that you'll see a correlation between people who struggle with affirmation and their unwillingness to just say thank you. Thank you, thank you. That was very helpful. Thanks for that. I hadn't thought about that way. There is nothing more engaging than to sit down with one of your direct reports, somebody that you hired to help you think, and to let them help you think, and then to thank them. Pay raises, they help, but that's not really the essence of engagement. The essence of engagement is thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful. I hadn't really put it together like that before. Really appreciate that. We blow the opportunity sometimes to really make that connection. And then finally, around growth, a big important component. Let me keep moving. In the book, Fitting and Standing Out, I talk about 7 elements. I conducted over 200 interviews with folks like you who work in a variety of organizations. It was just quite simple. Sit down, tell me about an authentic person in your life. Let's have a conversation. A lot of people focused on people at work, but some folks talked about people in their broader life. The elements are the same. I wanted to demystify authenticity because sometimes I get the sense that people view it as a mysterious construct. And like water, comprised of different elements, I wanted to demystify it so that you're aware of what it is that people are talking about. And in these interviews, there were 7 elements. So the first one is positivity. I have that glass up there to indicate glass half full. Optimism. When people describe an authentic person, they're talking about a person who generally leaves them thinking within the realm of possibility. It sort of opens up their energy as opposed to closing it down. In psychology, we call it explanatory style in terms of optimism or pessimism. Optimism tends to correlate with what people are when they're talking about an authentic person. Someone who helps me believe in myself, someone who helps me open up this realm of possibility in terms of where I might be able to contribute. The other aspect of positivity is when people are talking about an authentic person, a person who just makes them feel good about themselves. So if you are a manager, sometimes because we are time constrained, all we can do is just walk around. Wrong, 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 bad, wrong again, can't do that right. And before you know it, we become a conditioned stimulus, and people associate us with, again, negativity. Can't be vulnerable around that person. As opposed to finding, when people talk about an authentic person, it's a person who leaves them feeling good about themselves. Even in the midst of an era or a coaching conversation where this cannot happen again. But let me tell you a story. The best thing that you can do with somebody who's struggling with a mistake, rather than being a perfect person, tell them a story about 10 years ago when you messed up in a similar situation there, and watch the connection. It's called empathy. The sense that she can relate now to what I'm going. This can't happen again, but in the first instance, you can relate to it. I feel like I can open up a little bit more. So that sense of positivity, when people think about your leadership, do you fuel them enough when they're in the middle of a long haul? This thing around being real. When people think about your leadership, do they think of you as genuine? Genuine is a word that comes up a lot in those interviews. And they just basically, do people need a decoder? Are you the same person when you rock up? You know, you'll you'll adjust a presentation if you're talking to engineers. You may slant it in this direction. If you're talking to a group of educators, you may slant it in this direction. But there's got to be a consistency across who you are and how you bring yourself. And people who are one person here and another person there, where the language gets too obscure, people talk about real, just real, tangibly real. There's this thing called edge. Edge. I see some edge in this audience. Sometimes it's aesthetic. A person just walks in the room and you just are like, that person, you've got edge. You do. Sometimes people they have that sense of, there's just something, they're confident, it's not an arrogance, it's just a confidence. This is who I am, I'm just bringing it. It's Cadet Darren LaRue at the Air Force Academy, standing on the terrazzo with 4,000 cadets every morning in the formation. And Cadet LaRue always had his flight cap just a little bit over to the side, all 4,000 cadets. He was a cadet first class, he was a squadron commander, and yet he just needed to have that one little line of, and all the other cadets are rooting for him. They can't say anything, but you can feel the energy associated with it. Sometimes it's aesthetic, but sometimes it is It is, can I just play you this, video here? This is Lieutenant General David Morrison. And General Morrison was the commander of Australia's army until 2015. There was a rash of sexual harassment emails and pictures sent out across the airwaves across the Australian Army that was so offensive and foul, and General Morrison taped this message here to take it to his troops around how that would not go down. Sometimes edge, you gotta hear edge.
Earlier today, I addressed the media and through them the Australian public about ongoing investigations into a group of officers and NCOs whose conduct, if proven, has not only brought the Australian Army into disrepute, but has let down every one of you and all of those whose past service has won the respect of our nation. There are limits to how much I can tell you because the investigations into this network by both the New South Wales Police and the ADF Investigative Service are ongoing. But evidence collected to date has identified a group of men within our ranks who have allegedly produced highly inappropriate material, demeaning women, and distributed it across the internet and Defence's email networks. If this is true, then the actions of these members are in direct contravention to every value the Australian Army stands for. By now, I assume you know my attitude to this type of conduct. I have stated categorically many times that the Army has to be an inclusive organisation in which every soldier, man and woman, is able to reach their full potential and is encouraged to do so. Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues have no place in this Army. Our service has been engaged in continuous operations since 1999 and in its longest war ever in Afghanistan. On all operations, female soldiers and officers have proven themselves worthy of the best traditions of the Australian Army. They are vital to us maintaining our capability now and into the future. If that does not suit you, then get out. You may find another employer where your attitude and behaviour is acceptable, but I doubt it. The same goes for those who think that toughness is built on humiliating others. Every one of us is responsible for the culture and reputation of our Army and the environment in which we work. If you become aware of any individual degrading another, then show moral courage and take a stand against it. No one has ever explained to me how the exploitation or degradation of others enhances capability or honours the traditions of the Australian Army. I will be ruthless in ridding the Army of people who cannot live up to its values, and I need every one of you to support me in achieving this. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That goes for all of us, but especially those who by their rank have a leadership role. If we are a great national institution, if we care about the legacy left to us by those who have served before us, if we care about the legacy we leave to those who, in turn, will protect and secure Australia, then it is up to us to make a difference. If you're not up to it, find something else to do with your life. There is no place for you amongst this band of brothers and sisters.
You have no doubt where the general stands on the issue of harassment. Do people know your lines in the sand? You don't have to be a big shouting extrovert, but do people know in terms of your principles and what makes a difference, where you stand on things? Edge conveys that conviction. Vulnerability, I've talked about already. This is comfort with imperfection and the human condition. All of us in this room, it's just a matter of hours before your next mistake. Are you okay with that? Is that all right? Energy, I often say that this is what it looks like when you need someone. That's what it feels like. That's what's going on. When you drop in on a peer and say, I'm struggling with something, can you help me think? That's what it feels like when a direct report comes in and you go, look, I've got something big that I'm working on here and I'm just trying to get my brain through this, and can you help me think through this in terms of some experience? Energy that's blocked cannot connect, and so when people are describing an authentic person, they're talking about somebody who energizes them. So what's the energy exchange that you have with most people? Again, do you really know how to let people help you? The sixth element is integrity. That's my story. I make the case that it was hard being two people. It was hard being two people. It was draining. It's not sustainable. Integrity is one of those things that just goes to the foundation of trust. We pay more attention to congruence between words and actions, but your actions say everything. And at the end of the day, when people think about your leadership, are you consistent? Are you the same person that's going to be coming in each day? And then finally, the seventh element, connections. This is the general. This is the general saying, this isn't about male soldiers versus female soldiers. This is about decent, honorable soldiers versus rogue soldiers. And that sometimes your edge and your conviction, the energy you project it with, how you bring it, is a catalyst to bring people together, to get people united around different things. And so does your leadership pull people together? And are you wholehearted enough to learn from your peers? These are the 7 elements around this construct of authenticity. And if you're looking to enhance connection, it really is important for you to ask yourself the question, and maybe even with a few trusted peers around you, people who know you well, who you don't have to be perfect around, to just basically say, hey, can you give me a little bit of feedback on how it is that I, in terms of these 7 elements there, and ask you all to do some deep reflection around that. I have gone over my time, which I apologize for. We are at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience and for being here tonight. I hope that I left you with some things to ponder about the next time you're awake at 2:30 in the morning. Thank you so much. Thank you, David.